viral vectors for gene therapy back in 2002. Despite being a professor for many years, having been published many times, and have had numerous research grants, I'm 43 and my life is not satisfied. And why is it not? Because I don't think I've made the global impact that I could or would like to. So what this business opportunity represents is essentially my swan song. It's my moving forward to really make an impact globally. So BrainGear Labs is a global, or anticipates being a global diagnostics lab. Here's the current paradigm of diagnostics. You come see me, I need a test, I send a requisition to Quest, you then go to a patient service center in town, whether it's Quest or LabCorp, you get some blood drawn, that blood then goes back to the laboratory, they do the test, results come back to me, and then I talk to you about it. So, what's the disruptive innovation and problem with that? One, you need a significant amount of infrastructure in order to have that happen. So globally that doesn't work. So the disruptive innovation is to use saliva, spit for diagnostic, right? Saliva is very easy. One, it's non-invasive for all those people that are afraid of needles. Doesn't require very much processing. Anyone can collect it. You don't need trained phlebotomists or anyone else to do it. You wouldn't want your blood to be drawn multiple times in a day. In contrast, you can provide saliva numerous times in a day without too much difficulty. There isn't too much risk of infectious pathogens in terms of being exposed to biohazardous materials with saliva. So, this is not just my thought. The NIH believes saliva is also going to be on the forefront of diagnostics, and they funded something called the Global Salivary Proteome Project. And with this project, they have identified more than 2,400 proteins in saliva, and there are researchers all over the world working on making disease associations, linking A with a certain disease. The problem is, why can you not go to your doctor right now and spit in a cup and get it done? It's a very simple problem, actually. Saliva is a digestive fluid. So by the time you spit in this cup and ship it over to the lab, what happens? Everything in it is degraded, or it's starting to degrade. What does that mean? It means you can do some qualitative diagnostics, but you can't do anything quantitative. If you really need to measure X amount of something, you just can't do it. So, what is our solution? The solution is pretty simple. What we've really invented is a fixative that preserves DNA, RNA, protein, glycoproteins in saliva, in fact in all biological fluids. So as a result, when you spit in a cup with our preservative, everything's preserved. Importantly, our preservative also is stable for months, and we have data out to 6 months now that proteins and everything are preserved throughout. It's heat stable, meaning if you need to ship it via FedEx in a large container across the world, it doesn't matter what temperature it gets to. It's completely non-toxic, so you don't have to worry about it being biohazardous itself. And then most importantly, because there are some pathogens in saliva, especially if you're going to do diagnostics for, let's say, tuberculosis or something along that line, our preservative neutralizes all microbial pathogens. Fungi, bacteria, viruses, it doesn't matter. So you can actually ship our samples without having to label it biohazardous. So here's the typical sales model that we talked about. So essentially what we're doing is eliminating that patient service center, LabCorp, Quest. Now, essentially you go to your doctor and say, you know, Dr. or Mrs. Smith, you know, I'm not sure what's going on with your abdominal pain. I think we should screen you for ovarian cancer. Here's a test kit. You take it home, spit it, put it in a prepaid mailer, send it out to the laboratory. We send the results back to the doctor. That's it. That's as simple as possible. In terms of our sales, we hope to sell test kits, one directly to the physician through a direct sales model, or we can actually go through various distributors that sell medical supplies and products to physicians, like Henry Schein or PSS. So, I told you about what our technology is. It's an enabling technology, but you actually need the downstream diagnostic test to commercialize. So where are we moving with this? The first tests that we're working on are essentially DNA risk assessment tests. These are tests that look at what your risk for developing diabetes may be, for Alzheimer's disease, for atrial fibrillation. There's a whole bunch of these. Why did we pick these? One, because this is all in the public domain, so there's no IP issues associated with it. That's the predominant reason. Two, it allows us to have a large number of tests up and going relatively quickly to sell to multiple different specialties. The second area that we're working on is pharmacogenetics. So pharmacogenetics is genetic tests that determine how well you're going to metabolize certain drugs. So I can say, Mr. Smith, you know, I think we're going to have to put you on blood pressure medication. Before we do, we can do a test to figure out which one is the best for you. That's pharmacogenetics. We're up and going almost with all of these DNA tests and their pharmacogenetics. The last one is a test we've developed in-house, which is one for fungal pneumonia. So most people don't think about fungal pneumonia, except if you've had a bone marrow transplant, cystic fibrosis, or if you're immunocompromised. It's a long story how we got in this field, but since our preservative preserves DNA, it allows us to improve the sensitivity of testing. And now for these patients who are on a bone marrow transplant unit, instead of getting a blood test, which is not specific, or waiting for a culture, which may take 2 weeks, you can spit in a cup, and we have detection limits down to 4 fungal particles in some saliva. That's just an example of fungal pneumonia. Downstream, our goal is to license other biomarkers that have been identified and associated with disease through this NIH salivary proteomic project. At BioFlorida last week, in fact, I found out that the University of South Florida has a biomarker that's already been identified and validated for ovarian cancer, right for licensing to move forward. The other ones are oral cancer, technology out of University of Miami, and then lung cancer, which is out of UCLA. What's a market opportunity? So this is DNA testing overall. The total market for DNA testing is like $5 billion, which is just an astronomical number. If we look at risk assessment, which is the segment we're going to first talk about just for the DNA testing, it's about half of 1% of that. Even then, that represents about $50 million annually. From the fungal pneumonia, there's really no data out there, but if you think about the number of, this is the pharmacogenetics. This is data from Renshaw, and it shows that the number of pharmacogenetic tests ordered each year is growing and is about 13,000 to 15,000 annually. On the fungal pneumonia, like I said, there's no data out there other than the number of patients and how often they get the current blood test, and we estimate that would be about 15,000 to 20,000 tests ordered annually. Oral cancer, about 40,000 tests. Ovarian cancer, about 13,000. Now, this is what's interesting about it. This is the incidence of disease because, you know, it's hard to find the market size. For the number of patients with the disease, the actual number of tests ordered is about 3 times as many. Why? Because I see a lot of people, a lot of women for abdominal pain, which I may think of ovarian cancer. 2 out of 3 times the test is going to be wrong, but I still ordered the test because I need it for diagnostic purposes. So if you look at any single disease, the number of tests ordered is about 2 to 3 times the incidence of that disease. It's hard to come up with a competitive analysis because there's not too many companies in the salivary biomarker space, but we can look at the competition relative to the test offerings that we're talking about and look at the advantages that we provide. So first, from the risk assessment, there are 2 big companies that are doing that. One is called 23andMe, founded by now the wife of Sergey Brin of Google fame, funded by Google Ventures. The second is Navigenics, just sold last month to Life Sciences. They do kind of a whole genome type of analysis, okay? Everyone talks about how whole genome analysis is going to be great. It's not. It's too much information. When I see you as a patient, I have 20 minutes. How am I going to explain any type of genomic testing or data? What I need is much more disease-specific information relative to what you're here seeing me for. You know, Mr. Smith, I'm worried about lung cancer because you're a smoker. We should screen you annually. Whether your risk for lung cancer and everything else goes along with it. So, the true advantages we have compared to like 23andMe are, number one, cost. So they charge anywhere from $500 to $1,000 per test. Leaves very little margin from the physician standpoint of being able to mark it up and actually have patients willing to pull out a credit card for $600, $700. In contrast, we anticipate all of our test kits will be sold to physicians at $100, allowing them to sell test kits for about $150. Which in our market analysis with St. Vincent's Health Group in Jacksonville suggests is the price point that you get a significant number of tests ordered. When we compare it to the fungal diagnostics, The big issue really is that we can do multiple biomarker testing. So the current test is a blood test, only looks at one single marker. That's great, but what about if it's a different fungus? Because of the power of molecular technology and our sensitivity, our downstream analysis can identify no matter what fungal species it is. So right now we've tested and validated with about 20 different fungal species. Lastly, I want to compare it to just point-of-care diagnostics. That's kind of like the urine dipstick test or the strep test that you've had. That really would be the threat to salivary diagnostics. The advantages, point-of-care is also low cost, it's disease-specific. The difficulty is you can only look at one single biomarker, right? So if you look at oral cancer, there's 3 biomarkers that were actually predicted for oral cancer identified out of UCLA. You can't develop a dipstick test that's going to look and quantitate 3 different biomarkers and provide an interpretation to physicians in a short period of time that would reasonably allow them to look at it. In the interest of time, I'll move. What's going to be the basis of growth of this company? One, we have a simple pricing structure. Because we've developed this back-end process, we can develop just one single test kit that's sold to different specialties for what they see patients for. So cardiologists would order the atrial fibrillation test, neurologists the Alzheimer's disease test, whatever it may be. 2, because of the pricing, it allows us to monetize healthcare practices. It's an enabling technology. So all these biomarkers that USF is sitting on, they can't license it to anyone because no one's got a technology to be able to do a reference laboratory for the most part, unless they're licensing it to someone who's doing a point-of-care technology, which is, you know, a 5-7 year lifespan, whereas we can get things to market within 6 months to a year. And as you can imagine, this is right for global expansion. It makes it very easy to develop because of this distribution part, and the technology neutralizes all the pathogens. That means you can ship it across whatever you want, countries, etc. So what are our financial projections? This is based on data, as I said, from St. Vincent's Health Group in Jacksonville. For that panel of just risk assessment tests at $100, they thought they could sell approximately 1 test per week. So in our model, we said we would probably manage to sell to 250 physicians, 500 dentists, and maybe 50 hospital groups in that first year. If we're doing 1 test per week at just $100, we're looking at 67,000 tests in the first year and revenue of like 9.5 million. And then it expands somewhat exponentially as you develop a sales force to go out there and you offer more and more test offerings, and you expand for the most part globally. Our 3-year financial forecast essentially shows an EBITDA of 83 million by year 3. This is based on the assumptions of 25% of revenue for continuing R&D, develop continuing tests, a cost of sales estimate of 40%. We added another 30% on for marketing and sales because we figured direct sales is going to be the biggest challenge, and 15% for general and administration. Right now the company is 100% owned by me. It's an LLC about to transition into an S-Corp. It has 0% debt, and we have approximately $200,000 worth of capital equipment and assets. We're looking for 2 tranches of $500,000. We think it's a strong investment potential because 1, it has a strong revenue stream that's early. We think we can get to sales within 10 months. And there's a low capital investment because the facilities and the laboratory and the equipment already exist. In fact, if you notice, our startup expenses are mostly for personnel and benefits. The second largest category in there is legal, as we develop licensing agreements for these biomarkers. There's very little in terms of capital equipment. We actually need only 1 more piece of machinery in order to develop more high throughput. Marketing and sales is 0 because in this first 6 months, we're going through the process of getting there. The second tranche is going to be used almost exclusively to build market and for sales. So where are we? From the scientific side, from the pharmacogenetics, the risk assessment, and the fungal pneumonia, the R&D is all completely done and finished. We have good validation. What we're waiting for is we have collaborations with the University of Florida and Emory to get clinical samples for in-house validation for the purpose of getting approval through the regulatory channels. So the scientific validation is already done. The oral cancer, ovarian cancer, and lung cancer, we still are in the process of licensing those biomarkers. From the regulatory standpoint, we're developing our standard operating protocols and building our QC, QA protocols. We have regulatory consultants who have estimated about a 6-month timeline to CLIA approval once we have our QA and QC built in. CLIA, which regulates this space, is not worried about the scientific validity of the test, but much more so on the quality assurance that when we say X is 5, X should be 5 and should be reproducible from that standpoint. From the IP standpoint, the formula is a trade secret, exists in my brain and my notebooks, and there's a reason for that. For the last 6 months, I've been talking to numerous IP lawyers to come up with the optimal strategy to protect the formulation. Because the formula is relatively simple, it can be reverse engineered relatively quickly. We're not sure, or I'm not sure, that one could actually write IP that would be completely exclusive, meaning A, B, C, D, there's too many workarounds for just A, etc. So our thought is, 1, to keep it a trade secret, and 2, to file with a non-publication request when we get it. Second, once we develop a licensing agreement from the other biomarkers, we can add patents for method of use as add-ons for the formulation to the patents that exist already. And that's been the strategy that a number of people have talked with us about. Anticipate timeline to sales is anywhere from 10 months to 1 year. The second tranche will be to really do the marketing and sales about 6 months out. What's the exit strategy? IPO or acquisition. Diagnostics is a very fertile space. I just mentioned to you, Navigenics was just bought by Life Sciences for a couple $100 million. Athena Diagnostics is actually now owned by Quest for the most part. I don't have more recent data, but this is a very fertile space. This is an area I've been spending a lot of time on, which is our intellectual capital.
Yeah.
Oh, am I?
Yeah,
all right.
okay. But I want to hear this. So anyway, so
So this is me, so I serve all roles in the company at the moment.